right. So again, before anything, we absolutely have to talk about something that we talked about in Hebrew. I just gotta bring it up. So let's turn to Numbers 8. So let's do it in the English version first before anything. I think it is a very interesting section. I did tell I did tell Mom about it, and they told a couple other people about it. So go to Numbers 8. We were studying Hebrew and the different verb types and stuff like that, but there's a very interesting thing when the Levites are dedicated. So let me see exactly where this is. I think it is. I'm just looking here because there's a whole section about it. Yeah. So verse 21. Now mine actually hides it. So does anyone have a more traditional or more literal translation that can read verse 21? Do you have, is it New King James?
And the Levites purified themselves and washed their clothes. Then Aaron presented them like a wave offering before the Lord, and Aaron made atonement for them to cleanse them. And the like is italicized. Yep. He presented them a wave offering.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's take a look at what the Hebrew is saying here. I think it's really interesting, and I can't wait to actually explain to you what what the answer is. It's funny. So let's go. All right. So this is it. Actually, it's verse 11 as well. Also, it's 20. But here is 11. So they shall be offered. Hinif means to wave. So what he's saying is, and Aaron shall wave the Levites a wave offering, meaning he shall wave a wave offering. But what wave offering? Levites. So Aaron actually waved the Levites as a wave offering. It says like a wave offering, but that's just the way that you do wave offerings. It's like, okay, so you did a wave offering of wheat. You did a wave offering of the Levites. So the Levites are actually the wave offering. What in the world does that mean?
The New King James says that, and the Levites were purified, and they washed their clothes, and Aaron offered them as an offering before the Lord.
The problem is, the reason why this is in brackets here is because the word like is not there. If it were there, I'm just seeing if I can see it real quick. There is actually a word for that. And I can't find it right now, but it's definitely a thing that could have been used. He actually waved them, not necessarily, well, I guess you could say as, meaning it is they were the wave offering, they were used as a wave offering, but they just were the wave offering. So I think it's fascinating. Does anyone have any idea why? Any ideas? Throw them at me.
Why what?
Why they were a wave offering and how that could even be done.
You mean physically, or what the meaning?
Yeah, physically. What does that mean? He didn't actually wave them like a sheaf. So unless he did, my question is
maybe he got them all in a big circle, all holding each other's hands, and they waved back and forth.
I'll say any other idea. I have an idea, but does anyone have an idea? The answer.
What I can't keep coming back to is the wave offering that they offered during the Passover, this first day of the week.
That's the first day of. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think the fact that wave offering was just being accepted at the throne of God Sunday morning on the first day of the week during the week of the Passover.
Got it. That's
so
what
I'm wondering. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I was talking over you.
I just said, like, when we did this in Hebrew, like, I actually mentioned that section. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. And the other thing I was thinking is maybe this Levite was like a foreshadowing of that, because they were priests, and Jesus became our high priest.
That's what I thought. You got exactly the way I was thinking. Yep. Great mind.
Well, what do you expect?
Right?
I mean, the way you asked the question, Joel, it was so wide open. I didn't know what you were getting at. I
think that's what it means. I think it's because it's, the way I'm looking at it is like you have the Holy of Holies in the temple. And so it's like you have the outer wall, then you have like the inner chamber, and then you have the inner chamber, right? So think of that also in the plane of like the world. And you have the nations, but they're all God's creation, right? But then you have a chosen people, and then you have the chosen people within the chosen people. And so because they didn't necessarily get any sort of like possessions like the other tribes did. They did, kind of, but it's like they had like on top of all the separation that the Israelites did, the Levites had their own separation compared to the rest of the Israelites. And so when they were presented, it seemed to me that like they were being presented as like the first of like of all the nations in terms of like their with like lineage in terms of like their I think you see what I'm getting at. So like, but how that's done, I don't know. The answer for what they did was no one knows. We went into the lexicons, we went into the codexes and all that stuff. The answer is the biggest among all of them, united. That's the answer.
Well, at least they're honest, right? At least they're honest about it.
So I thought we had a ball of a time, like looking at that, because like the whole answer is something happened.
I think the more interesting side, what the meaning of that is, what you were talking about. The Levites were a smaller group than the Israel, which was a smaller group,
right,
etc. But then it comes down to the high priest was the only one that can go into the Holy of Holies, which is Christ.
So he was like the separate of the separate of the separate. Yep.
Right. Now, how does that reflect under the new covenant?
Well,
I'm thinking in this time between not almost but not yet.
Yeah, I would say
Yeah.
Where Jesus was the way.
That's exactly what I was thinking. He was the sheep.
He was the first of the first fruit. Right. He was the first of the first fruits.
This is how I perceive it, okay? And I think I told them this one. I often like forget like whom I told what. So this is how I've been perceiving it recently, is you have Jesus presented as the wave offering, right? And then it's like the Christians of this age are like the Pentecost, right? It's like you waited a certain amount of time, then you had that first harvest time. And then it was, I mean, you know what I mean, because there's a lot of confusion, even in Hebrew, between the first fruits and like that whole thing, right? But then you have the wait until the final trumpet, when you have the final harvest, like the pulling in of everything that of everything else, and it's like, and that's how I see it. Now I can absolutely see difference of opinion here. Like there's no problem with that.
Of course, there's always going to be that, but the way I'm looking at it is they could not harvest anything until the wave sheaf was offered.
Exactly.
And then after that, Pentecost was the early harvest of the spring crops. Right. And then the big harvest came at trumpets.
And then we keep looking in Scripture about the final trumpet call. And that happens, and then the Feast of Tabernacles happens. I said happens. Wow, I just did the Hebrew thing. Happens after the final trumpet call, and I think that's symbolic of how Revelation looks at things as well. It's like talking about like the final great harvest. And
Right.
it's so it's because think about it. He died for everyone. I'm reiterating, I am not universalist. However, like we were talking about before, I think we should always hope for something like that. And I always think that if God truly is a love of boundless love and mercy, I do think that there will be like that. This is my personal opinion. I'm reiterating. That there will be a time for a great harvest as well. And I still believe that we are in the I guess you could say like the summer months of that, because you had the first harvest that happened in Pentecost, and then and there is purposefully a long span between that time and the Feast of Trumpets. And I think that's and I think where we are in terms of Christianity is like in that period of just waiting. What?
I would agree with that. Yes. But it also says God is not willing that any should perish, but all should come to salvation. Right. So that's his ultimate goal. But what?
Like you'll also respect others' choices. He won't force you.
Oh, right. That's what I'm saying. Unless you absolutely refuse, fine, you're out. You know. But if he's, I think he's going to be merciful. He'll be merciful.
Yep. I completely think so. The other, which is exactly like when you think about it theologically speaking, that's what Christ calls us to do. So like when we are being like merciful to others and like are reaching out to others and are like doing the things that the rest of society won't do, how much more so will God do for those who are suffering or for those who have turned away because of something like whatever happened in their past, or just because of their upbringing. Like think about like being born into another religion, like living your entire life that way. The chances of you turning to another or like to Christianity are slim to none. But it does happen. Don't get me wrong, but it's still slim. and so to think that the whole rest of the world that didn't pick the right spiritual lottery is going to perish like that, I don't sit well with that. Again, that is my opinion. And I do, but that just to me, just because of like who we are as Christians, we are Christ-like. We are as Christ. Like we were going back to the like and as thing, but like we are like small Christs running around. We are like, how much more so will he do for everyone else? So that's the way I look at it.
Isn't that the original definition of a Christian?
Yes. Exactly.
The Greeks were making fun of them, calling them little Christs. And they said, "Oh, okay, that's a good name. I think we'll take it."
I think it really puts a different dynamic on the whole spectrum of things as well, and then recognize it. Oh, especially when Paul gets into his whole spiel in Romans, it's like it becomes all the more convincing, I guess you could say, when you read his words from that perspective, because he talks about like how great sinners we are and were, and the transformation, and how we're no longer slaves to sin, and all that stuff is amazing. So, you're going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure Paul would be impressed with your definition of his spiel. Sorry. Just jagging you, Joel. Just jagging you.
That was good. I'm gonna now me being the nerd I am, I'm making sure there is a positive context. I've always thought there was a positive context to it. It is. It's exactly what I thought it was. A long or fast speech or story, typically one intended as a means of persuasion. So,
okay, let's turn to the book. Let's turn to the spiel of the Romans.
Anyway, all right.
One of those words is taking on a whole new context.
Right. It's like, oh, there we go, it's on his spiel. No, it's like, he actually, hopefully, it's our negative way. Let me take a look. Oh, okay, but there is a negative. Well, I knew there is that negative connotation, but
As in most things, it probably wasn't the original intent. But,
right, a synonym is monologue. So
yep.
his monologue in Romans.
Yeah.
So, well, that was my mistake. We'll admit that wrong. So, all right, let's turn to Philippians.
Technically correct.
Technically, anyway, we're
Not so much cultural.
yeah. Let's turn to Philemon. If you don't know where that is, it's directly before Hebrews. So just find the big book of Hebrews and then go one page back.
Oh, it's just after Titus. What are you talking about?
Or that. So, I'm not going to spend much time on this. However,
don't blink.
What?
Don't blink.
There is something pertinent when it comes to Romans. So we know that like a lot of this has to do with Onesimus, the concept of like the master and the slave, and don't accept him. This is huge. Actually, no, it really ties in really well. Okay. So what Paul is saying is, hey, he's your slave, but now regard him as a brother, as an equal, as someone for whom Christ died, because Onesimus has been of great value to me, and I'm sure he'll be of great value to you. Remember this. Philemon is absolutely before Romans was written. Remember the concept of slavery in Christianity. That's a big point, okay? I think it's funny because I think I gave Linda a preview of coming attractions when I saw her on Wednesday. So I'm really excited about this one. So, again, in Roman society, well, not again, we really didn't talk about this, the tiers of Roman society, slaves were treated much better than American slaves were. And so that is one cultural perception that we will absolutely have to adjust. It is for that reason that many translations don't translate it as slave. They say servant, because our perception of slave is similar to when like you had like the Black and Native American slavery from before the Civil War, and that is a very all slavery is not good. Like I'll just say that, but like the perception of Roman slavery was different. They did have certain rights. And they were kind of sort of property, but not to the extent that was done here in the United States. And so there was that top-down perspective, but there was a certain level of respect as well. Now, so when you look at, but still there was that top-down thing, and Paul was telling Philemon, yes, you are the master, right? But don't look at Onesimus as a slave. He is your slave, but now he is also a brother in Christ. And this is completely shifting the entire dynamic. The caste system is gone in terms of like, when we are in the kingdom. Christ himself talks about hierarchy, but when you actually look at it too, hierarchy is also from like a bottom to top perspective in terms of like the least of you, the ones of like that type of mentality. We're talking about like turning our perceptions upside down, and this is very similar in that light. So anyway, so there was and he's also in chains here. And it is in his imprisonment in Rome. So more almost certainly. But does anyone have any? He also writes in his own handwriting. That's an interesting point. And I think of anything else. I think that's basically it. Anyone have anything on Philemon before we move on to Philippians? Oh, also forgiveness. That's a big point. But cool.
Are you saying anything for the entire letter, or are you just saying anything for the beginning?
Entire letter.
Oh. Boy, you really gloss, don't you?
So,
You don't have much of a spiel for this one, huh?
I do. It's coming in Romans.
Okay.
Another point is forgiveness when it comes to Philemon, because Onesimus did wrong Philemon, and so what Paul is telling Philemon to do is to accept it, similar to like like just as much as Christ has forgiven him as well as forgiven you. If he's forgiven Onesimus, why would you not forgive him? Like, so forgive him just as much, if not more. Like, you know what I'm saying? He's like, that's Paul's conclusion there. That's his spiel. So.
Yep. Absolutely. And I think it's interesting the setup he has, because he starts right off, Paul, a prisoner of Christ Jesus, and Timothy, our brother. And then the next thing he talks about here is to Philemon, our beloved friend and fellow laborer. And then he talks about this other guy whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce, our fellow soldier, to the church in your home. So apparently, I'm not sure exactly what that means. I wonder if the soldier became a Christian with Paul being his prisoner. Anyway, it was just interesting, I thought. But the way he introduces the entire letter, it's the setup for his request.
That's the thing. Yes, you're right. What? So it's the setup for his request?
Yes.
How did Paul start Romans?
I don't have it memorized. I'd have to go look.
He introduces himself as a slave. And also Philippians. He also introduces himself as a slave.
Yeah, bondservant of Jesus Christ, yeah.
Right, and it's almost always written bondservant in other translations because of like certain. Although I think King James also said bondservant, but it was technically slavery, and yeah. So
yeah, I think it's interesting. It looks like Paul was going to be under Philemon's care.
Yeah, that's what Dad said. That's what Dad was talking about. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, eventually, because he said, "I'll be handed over to you." Hopefully.
Fingers crossed. Anyway, and anything else on Philemon? Philippians. I know that one of Linda's favorite verses is in this book, and I love this chapter as well as chapter 4. And what I love about this though is like this entire book is a very hopeful one. It's filled with encouragement, and it's like that. It's like just like when you have like hold on. Yeah, it's just basically like the entire thing is just filled with like gratitude and encouragement and like I really like this letter, right? And so let's go ahead and start with like verse 3 because I do want to give that particular verse a little bit of highlight. So every time I think of you, I give thanks to my God. Whenever I pray, I make my requests for all of you with joy, for you have been my partners in spreading the good news about Christ from the time you first heard it until now. And I am certain that God, who began the good work within you, will continue his work until it is finally finished on the day when Christ Jesus returns. So it's right that I should feel as I do about all of you, for you have a special place in my heart. You share with me the special favor of God, both in my imprisonment and in defending and confirming the truth of the good news. God knows how much I love you and long for you with the tender compassion of Christ Jesus. I pray that your love will overflow more and more, and that you will keep on growing in knowledge and understanding For I want you to understand what really matters, so that you may live pure and blameless lives. That's a reference to sacrifice as well. Like the blamelessness is like the spotlessness, the no blemish. There we go. So until the day of Christ's return, may you always be filled with the fruit of your salvation, the righteous character produced in your life by Jesus Christ. For this will bring much glory and praise to God. And so that's just a little section there from verses 3 to 11. What it is just basically how the entire letter goes. And it's like talking about like living like as Christ, for Christ. Everything that you do has to is as if like you're living in the kingdom. There's like a whole section talking about like how yes, you're living here, but your actual citizenship is in the kingdom. And there's like talking about like be Christ, be perfect, like he was perfect. That type of like again, encouragement, and like it's like the entire letter is filled with it. Talking about, let me take a look here. Here's something that's interesting. Is in chapter 2, verse 14. Do everything without complaining and arguing. Bear with me, okay? So that no one can criticize you. Live clean, innocent lives as children of God, shining like bright lights in a world full of crooked and perverse people. Hold firmly to the word of life. Then on the day of Christ's return, I will be so proud that I did not run the race in vain and that my work was not useless. Race imagery again. But I will rejoice even if I lose my life, pouring it out like a liquid offering to God, just like your faithful service is an offering to God. And I want, so we're talking about offerings and sacrifice and all that stuff, right? And I want all of you to share that joy. Yes, you should rejoice, and I will share your joy. And, okay, real quick, so I was pausing on certain words because all of those have relevance. Talking about, someone asked me recently about like noticing things when reading scripture today, and it's just like this because we were talking about certain image-based words, fruit-based words, like when you pour things out, offering, what type, talk about the lights. He said it crooked, but like think about like the light that shines, like when God said, "Let there be light." The concept, all these things. Talking about complaining and arguing. Now it doesn't outright state it, but I would see that something like, "Don't be like Israel in the wilderness." So that no one can criticize you. Live clean. Talking about that cleanliness that you get when Christ's blood washes over you. Lead innocent lives. There was my translation says innocent for a certain word, and I think that's the one that's for blameless. I think it's the same term, which would be the Hebrew word for that without blemish. Like we were talking about that before. And like as children, this is very important here. As children of God, and so like Christ was the child of God, right? We're going to get right into that in Romans, because Paul is very much developing his outline for Romans. Is like the big punch at the end. It's like that whole thing is like everything, in my opinion, like really builds up to that masterpiece that is Romans. Anyway. So hold firmly, grasp hold of. Remember in Genesis when it talks about clinging onto. That is a very important image. Cling to God is very much what is said in Hebrew. And I do believe this is similar as well when you're looking at what Paul's saying here. Then on the day of Christ's return, I'll be proud that I didn't run the race in vein. So that's that race imagery, and that my work was not useless. And we're talking about like the concept of like, okay, you have two types of work. You have the type where it's like vapor. You can't grasp hold of it. Like, do you work with a closed fist or with an open hand? Which is definitely embodied in both Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. I might be wrong on that one. So I know that the clenched fist and open hand are on both. So, but I forget. I know like the talking about like don't be praying with like clenched fist, but like pray with open hands or something like that. That's another image as well. Talking about in the faithful service being an offering in Romans 12. That we're going to get to that. That is one of like the key verses of like basically all of Scripture. I remember when I myself was like shifting, like when God was doing a marvelous work within me. That beginning of chapter 12 struck me really hard, and we are going to get into that. I am so excited because now there's a nuance to that one that I hadn't seen before, and this is like a relatively recent development. So hopefully, like it'll be understood with me rambling the way I do. And so, but I'm trying to like hammer home certain points in Philemon and in Philippians when we are looking at this, because when we get to Romans, it's going to be like right there. I hope, God willing. So, I'm talking about, and basically, go ahead.
I was going to ask say something here. I don't know what translation you're having, but I didn't hear it when you were reading it. This is the NIV. I thought it was another one.
I'm NLT, so we're similar translations. Go ahead.
Verse 15, so that you may be blessed and pure. I'm in the wrong word. Okay. So that you may become blameless and pure, children of God without fault, crooked in a depraved generation, in which you shine like stars in the universe.
That's the nuance I did not catch because I was reading from the NLT.
I think it masks some of these really interesting things. Just thought I'd point that out.
Okay, that's Romans, Philippians 2 what?
15. I'm trying to open up another translation, but it's not responding.
Dad, you're helping the study tonight. This is...
well, excuse me then.
For once.
For once!
for first time, huh? That was the first time for everything.
Philippians 2:15. Because I've always been reading it out of the New Living, and because of that, I missed this one. Yeah, it's stars.
It would be interesting to see if what the interlinear says on that.
Oh.
That's we might. Oh, you're looking. I'm sorry. I was looking at my Bible. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen.
Sons of God.
What's it say?
I knew it was sons of God. I knew that. But he was talking about you will be living as sons of God. Perhaps a sun, a star. Yeah, it is stars. Because look at this word here, S-T-E-R. That's definitely star. So the reason why I know that is because star is actually shared among so many languages. It's one of the most commonly shared words. Like similar STR is one of the most commonly shared like triconsonant roots. And so that, yeah, I would say it's a star.
I think back to Abraham when he promises his descendants will be as the stars of heaven.
Mm.
And it's a theme running throughout the scriptures.
So it's funny because if we're looking at the divine counsel, here it's like blameless and innocent children of God, instead of like the ones that weren't blameless and innocent. And it's like I think Dad, you helped this study tonight so much you have no idea. Because that's what we're going to...
You could pay me later. That's all right.
Would you prefer quarters?
As long as they add up in dollars, I don't mind.
Okay, I just gotta say, when we do our studies, right? Like there are times when there are certain revelations that pop to me, like when we're reading, that I didn't notice, but that it just flows right in. That was a perfect example because it's this stuff. Like so now that star stuff is marked to you. You like when you said it to me, it's like it just coalesces again. I said, so okay. So you know how like ad nauseum was like one of my catchphrases for it. Now right now it's coalesce. So anyway, but yes, it really does bring everything together. What you just said, it really does. Not to mention that Paul wrote this more than likely not too long before he wrote Romans. So anyway, yes. Awesome. Okay, so we have the race as well. It's a very interesting. This is very commonly quoted, but the whole race idea is like win or you run to win. That is such. I think it's interesting because Paul is definitely using the culture of the time with like the different games that they had, and of course you had races in other cultures, but like it's that he's using. There's also like the laurel crown. Is it here that he talks about it? You mentioned there's like a mention of a laurel crown in some point in Scripture, and it's like he's talking about like the triumphant entry. Like we already went over that before. So here, like this is just another example of how Paul is definitely talking from the culture of the time. And of course, we already talked about this one. In chapter 3, verse 5, I was circumcised when I was 8 days old. I'm a pure-blooded citizen of Israel and a member of the tribe of Benjamin, a real Hebrew if there ever was one. I was a member of the Pharisees who demanded the strictest obedience to the Jewish law. I was so zealous that I harshly persecuted the church. And as for righteousness, I obeyed the law without fault. I once thought these things were valuable, but now I consider them worthless because of what Christ has done. Yes, everything else is worthless when compared with the infinite value of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, not for Paul's own sake, for Christ's sake. Like that's an interesting point to me. For Christ's sake, I have discarded everything else, counting it all as dog doo-doo. And it's an interesting reference, and to reiterate. That's not a catchphrase. Back in verse 2, he says, "Watch out for those dogs, those people who do evil, those mutilators, who say you must be circumcised to be saved. For we who worship by the Spirit of God are the ones who are truly circumcised." The purpose of circumcision was that tent removal. It's a common a revelation of sorts, and talking about snark and sass, which is what we titled last week. It's like wait, was it here? He said like I wish they would do more than maybe that was Galatians. I think that was Galatians. But then it goes, I wish they would just go the whole way. Anyway. I'm just taking a look. Okay, so verse 21 of chapter 3, he will take our weak mortal bodies and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using the same power with which he will bring everything under his control. Now, this is a later letter. I don't know if his idea shifted or if it's just another way of saying exactly the same thing. I think it's another way of saying exactly the same thing. He talks about the difference between spiritual bodies and flesh bodies, right? And it's like, and flesh in the way that he uses it, it's like that weak thing, that thing that dies. And we were talking about spiritual bodies, and I think it's First Thessalonians, where he talks about the temple, talk about spiritual bodies. And that's, so, like, for me, like, I see, like, a thing here is like, well, wait, is it physical? I think it is just because of the concept of Christ rising in a physical form, and he had Thomas say, touch me. Like, I am, like, physical. And so here, it's like, I think that whole concept of spiritual bodies is more like spiritually refreshed, like brand new, like that type that will never die. And I think here it's just another reiteration of the same thing. He will take our weak mortal bodies and change them into glorious bodies like his own, using this, because he's talking about how Christ has a body, and like using the same power with which he will bring everything under his control. All things will be made new, and it's like that. It's love it. So, I think that's oh, notice in this one he doesn't say this is, read this in my own handwriting. Like, so, yeah, that beginning of 4 from like verse 1 to 9, it's just, I just love that. It's, talk about encouragement there. It's like the whole thing's encouragement, but it's just like, hold on. Like that, it's that type of phrasing that he has. He's just like, hold on, keep moving, win that race, keep moving forward, and then we shall all rejoice at the end. That's I just love the whole concept of it. Philippians packs a punch. So anything that anyone has on Philippians before we even get started with the concept of Romans? Okay. Before we turn to Romans, let us go to Isaiah 40. Paul likes to quote a lot from Isaiah, but I want to show something. We're going back to parallelism and like perpendicularism, or like it's like, or they call it chiastic parallelism. It's like ABBA versus ABAB versus AABB. It's like the different types of parallelism that you have, or AA prime. So like A prime would be like the same thing but with amplification. It's like, all right. Okay, so all of chapter 40 it has to do with a lot of comfort. It has to do with like talking about like how great and grand God is. Let's just let's start in verse 6. A voice said, "Shout." I asked, "What should I shout?" Shout that people are like the grass. Their beauty fades as quickly as the flowers in a field. The grass withers and the flowers fade beneath the breath of the Lord. And so it is with people. The grass withers and the flowers fade. So we're getting that repetition thing going here. But the word of our God stands forever. O Zion, messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops. Shout it louder, O Jerusalem. This is one thing I want to say here is, so we're talking about shout, and Isaiah goes, shout what? Now it's saying Zion shout. Shout, O messenger of good news, shout from the mountaintops. Shouteth louder, O Jerusalem. Shout and do not be afraid. Tell the towns of Judah, your God is coming. Yes, the sovereign Lord is coming in power. He will rule with a powerful arm. See, he brings his reward with him as he comes. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will carry the lambs in his arms, holding them close to his heart. He will gently lead the mother sheep with their young. So all this imagery, like having to do with like that fatherly love, but more than just fatherly love, it's like caring for animals, right? And it's like a shepherd cares for like the animals. Okay, so we were just saying like, okay, so you got shout. I heard a voice saying shout, and I'm like, shout what? And then just after that, you have like Zion, shout from the mountaintops, right? And then you have in verse 12, who has held the oceans in his hand? Who has measured off the heavens with his fingers? Who else knows the weight of the earth, or has weighed the mountains and hills on a scale? This is a parallel with Job. When God makes his defense and says, hey, were you there? Where were you when I did these things? All right, anyway, who is able to advise the Spirit of the Lord? Who knows enough to give him advice or teach him? Has the Lord ever needed anyone's advice? Okay, stop. Has the Lord ever? Okay, let's be frank, right? Does he need advice? Does he actually need it? The answer is clear. No, he doesn't need it. He invites it. We were talking about the concept of the divine counsel. Dude, there is image again. Just like when God made his defense before Job, at the beginning of Job, he had that council chamber. Micaiah, when he said, I saw God in this heavenly council chamber. We were talking about the stars being the members of the council. And we were just talking about that in Philippians, to be pure and blameless. It's like, oh wait, and we were talking before about being members of the council, that we are like the stars, that we are put into that position, right? So he doesn't need it, but he invites it. Anyway, so does someone teach him what is right or show him the path of justice? Of course, the answer is no. Of course, that answer is no. But talking about that, he invites. Why would he even say, "Come, let us reason together"? There's a very important concept when it comes to that. It's not like, no, let me just tell you what to do. He does. Don't get me wrong. He does tell us what to do. But he also invites discussion. And he also listens just as much as we are to listen to him. And so this is, anyway. So no, for verse 15, no. For all the nations of the world are but a drop in the bucket. They are nothing more than dust on the scales. He picks up the whole earth as though it were a grain of sand. I love the imagery. All the wood in Lebanon's forests and all Lebanon's animals would not be enough to make a burnt offering worthy for our God. Think critically here. Then why is it that when people made offerings, a single animal was good and pleasing? So when you're talking about no, not all the animals in Lebanon are worthy, that is true. But God invited that. I wouldn't even say compromise here. It's just the participation, just that active, loving participation. So that's why I'm saying when you're looking at this, think critically, because it's there were sacrifices made, offerings made, but because God was inviting people to participate in His good world, participate in His good world. That is a Tim Mackey phrase right there. Anyway, I haven't heard that one in a while. I've actually been out of tune with Bible project for a while. I'll have to get back into it. I have a vacation coming up, Tim. So, So, and then you have verse 17. The nations of the world are worth nothing to him. Then why did he die? So, like, we're talking about, I was just talking to a couple other people about, like, when God makes, like, these really, like, when Christ says love, that love-hate thing, it's like, love, I think he said, like, it was the concept of, like, will hate his father and mother. It's, like, obviously not. It's hyperbole. And the concept here is, I wouldn't say hyperbole, but it's stark contrast, because think about it. In God's divine presence, yes, the nations are nothing, but yet he turns his eyes toward them. And why would he say what he said at the end of Jonah and say, well, shouldn't I have so much concern for 120,000 who don't know their right from their left hand? And like, and they're animals. Right. So this is like the concept of like what we're getting at, okay? And then in his eyes, they count for less than nothing. Mere
I think this is a comparison of God and everything else. And I think your translation is a little off myself, because what I have is all the nations are as nothing before him.
Okay. So this would be where the Hebrew word comes in. It is this equals this. Like, that's how that word works. Yep.
Okay.
It's the word. What it is, chapter 40, verse 17, correct?
Yeah. According to this translation, it's all the nations are as nothing before him. They are accounted by him as less than nothing and emptiness. And I think it's doing a comparison.
No, bad.
Okay. This is a bad one? Come on, show it to us.
Okay. So this is the word for as, right there. And so it looks like a backwards C. Now, so before, actually, this is not the normal word for before someone, lifnei. It actually is nerdo, which is like opposite him, opposite. So this is like opposition. Right here, like this is like this.
Or it's a comparison. It's comparing two things, and how compared to God, there's nothing that's like him.
Okay, there is a perfectly good word for before him. Okay, that is lifnei, which is like remember Jonah, when Jonah fled from the presence of the Lord. That's the word lifnei, from before, like right there, right? Negev, which is where you get the Negev Valley. It means like opposite a stream, like opposite, like to like it's, you can see them like on the other end of the field. That's the meaning of it.
So isn't this showing the opposite of God to everything else?
No, you're right on the terms of it being a comparison. I just think it's funny because we're talking about nations and how they were like, but they're talking about like the stuff. Never mind, I'm nerding out. I don't even know how to say it. So, we were talking about the nations of the world, the 70 nations, right? And how he has cast them aside. He does care for them, but he casts them aside. It's interesting to me that we have this word instead of lifnei. And let me see if I can actually get a better translation by just clicking on the concordance. Opposite, yep. Opposite, in front of, in sight of. But in Hebrew, if you're talking about in his eyes, you would say you would actually say in his eyes. But yeah, that's interesting. So less than nothing. So that yeah, definitely nothingness and worthless, they are counted by him. Yep.
I wonder if that word before has the same connotation as Nimrod. The great hunter before the Lord. Which could
No, it's neged
okay,
would be what is the term, but like I just want to see what the actual.
That's when I'm wondering, all nations against him are as nothing.
Foreign origin. It doesn't say? Moraz, rebel. Babylonian name. Oh.
Do you remember the phrase?
It could also mean a god.
Yeah, great hunter before the Lord.
Yeah, great hunt. Yeah, but like we had like the name of Babylonian king or prince.
Right. Yeah, but he was before the Lord or against.
Right. Oh, okay. Let's take a look. What it says.
Yeah, mighty under.
Deuteronomy what? Okay. Genesis 10:9. That will be very interesting to see. Bifne. Yep, that's the word I was talking about. So you have the difference between this word, which is I've never seen this used as before. I've always seen this as opposite. Yep. So yeah, that's bifne. That means like in the face of, before the face of. Yep. Yep. And it's funny because my Hebrew is actually getting faster. I've noticed that like recently. It's like, oh, wait a second, I'm like reading a lot faster, so I'm really excited. It's really cool. I really love Hebrew. It is definitely a very difficult language, but it's funny because Chinese was easier for me. But let's go ahead and take so. But yeah, no, like it is. But yes, Dad, you're right. Like the whole concept of like it is like comparing there. It's so. Oh yeah, like the same thing. Even in verse 18, like to whom can you compare God? What image can you find to resemble Him? And but what image can we find to resemble Him?
I know. Yeah, back Genesis chapter 3 or 2.
What?
Genesis 2, 3.
I think it's the same word. Let me check. Okay, so we're just saying. Okay, let's go to 18. I'll put you guys in on the fun as well, regardless of how much it kills my computer. That's the word. That is the word. Where is it when it says likeness? Genesis 1 what?
I think it's Genesis 2, or the end of Genesis 1 maybe.
Oh.
Towards the end. I don't know. 26? Is it 126? Try 126.
Yes, that is it. 26, you got it.
Took me a minute, sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no, that's Selim. But it's also here. There it is.
According to our likeness. Yep.
See that?
That's the same word?
Yeah, exactly the same word. Yeah, it is. So, yeah, I love it. So I think
is that the same? Is that the same word? Is that the same word that's translated mostly in Hebrew as image?
Likeness or
Likeness.
image. So okay. The amount of words there are for the word idol are many. And the amount of words, and like the word for image and likeness in Genesis is very interchangeable. Basically, we're talking about like the doubling of meanings of things, like how we would have like 2 words for rest or 2 words for, I'm trying to think now, and I'm turning the blank, but there's 2 words for a lot of things. I was just coming across it in my studies this week. It's like, oh my goodness, another one?
There.
What?
There.
Oh, there. No, we're actually talking about 2 words. There's like synonyms, like almost exact synonyms. Not entirely, But yeah, those two are very close in, like, as synonyms. So you can translate it as image as well, the word that's used for likeness. But think critically, again, to whom can you compare God? What image can you find to resemble him? The context is clear. No one, but everyone at the same time. It's paradoxical. And so we're entering like this really cool realm of now that we are looking at, okay, let's go to the end of chapter 40, verse 26. Look up into the heavens. Who created all the stars? Who brings them out like an army, one after another, calling each by its name? Because of his great power and incomparable strength, not a single one is missing. O Jacob, how can you say the Lord does not see your troubles? O Israel, how can you say God ignores your rights? Have you never heard? Have you never understood? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of all the earth. He never grows weak or weary. No one can measure, and yet we as Christians are said, never weary yourself from doing good. Like, do you get that we are his likeness? Like, anyway, no one can measure the depths of his understanding. He gives power to the weak and strength to the powerless. Even youths will become weak and tired, and young men will fall in exhaustion. But those who trust in the Lord will find new strength. They will soar high on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint. Okay, context of Isaiah 40. You begin where they're basically saying, God did this, did all these things. And it's like, who is like God? Can you compare God to anything else? Like, does he need people's advice? All that stuff. And then at the very, 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 very end, it says, if you trust in God, you won't grow weary. You'll fly. You will, it's like, it completely counteracts it all. It's like the answer's right there. The answer that we've known all along as we're reading this, but I love the poetic nature of it. And so the whole purpose of Isaiah 40 is saying, if you trust in him, then you will be as him or like him or in his likeness, right? So, now, it's time for Romans. Let's take a break first, though. But I do believe the pump has been primed for this one. So this is an exciting journey. I cannot wait to start it. But first, a break. So before anything on Isaiah 40, anything we've covered before, because when we get into Romans, it's going to be Roman. So, anything?
Nope.
Okay, I'll catch you. Yeah. Okay. What? No, I think that was a no. Okay.
I was just.
We'll go ahead.
I was just.
Okay. Cool. All right. I'll catch you on the other side of this one. Okay, guys. Romans. This is the biggest epistle that Paul wrote that we have evidence of, and it's less of a direct thing rather than like an overall thing. I don't know if Paul, because Paul said at the end of it, I hope I can see you. So I don't know if he had that opportunity. No one knows what happened necessarily to Paul after this. There is speculation, there is tradition, but like the actual knowledge of what happened to Paul, no one knows. And so this is like where we're actually going to start so everything beyond that is speculation. But what we do have is this epistle, which he absolutely wrote. And it is a masterpiece. Everything comes together. And it's like
it's been compared to the old Isaiah of the New Testament.
The Isaiah of the New Testament, yeah. It really is a masterpiece. Now, unfortunately, you're going to jump some But we're going to get like the overall context, and please, by all means, read it. Talk amongst yourselves. So,
we will.
Now, let me be clear. This book is often used in ways that Paul never intended his words to be used. Actually, same thing with Corinthians. Like the same thing with it has definitely been used to people's detriment.
Just like the rest of the Bible.
I mean, it's going to say, yeah, all of
What's the difference? What's the difference?
And one thing that is so amazing is you have to remember that one thought leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. That's why I do encourage like going through it, like just sitting down and just going through it. It won't take too long. And
you mean to tell me Paul was building on one thing and then the next thing is he's arguing his case all the way through, and really?
He would never. He couldn't have. He wasn't trained.
I was
sure.
Nailed it. He's not trained in
These are just random script verses that you can put on walls and quote and stuff. Don't worry about it.
He was liar, pants on.
Right, that's why I absolutely had to. Like when we had our thing last week, the title had to be Snark and Sass.
Yeah.
It was just like, but here I don't see much sass. I see desperation. Would that be the right word? Urgency. Right. I would say it's like he's pushing it. Mm-hmm. Like he is like, this is him really putting everything out on the table. Not to mention it's a compilation of all his thoughts that he's ever had. Now, when we look at Christ as a figure, like our God, right? Like he had like that stalwart way of doing things. I personally now look at Paul's writings and see development. I really do see Paul's thoughts like developing as you go through like the chronology of when these letters were written, and when we actually eventually get to the other letters, it'll be an interesting exercise. Preview coming attractions, but when we get to when we're looking at Romans, it's like everything that we came across, like the big concepts that we came across in the other epistles so far, are definitely in here. And so, of course, we start with his greeting, and then when he gets into, like, he starts off talking about, like, he goes into, like, this whole, he uses, like, logic to really speak to people. And so he's talking about like the good news, and then he leads into like what people are, like how they act, and I think this is like so that whole thing from like verse 18 to the end of the chapter is really talking about like how like humanity had a purpose, had turned away from that purpose, and instead of just turning away from that purpose, they perverted that purpose. An example is, verse 21, just for example. Yes, they knew God, but they wouldn't worship him as God or even give him thanks. And they began to think up foolish ideas of what God was like. As a result, their minds became dark and confused. Claiming to be wise, they instead became utter fools. And instead of worshiping the glorious, ever-living God, they worshipped idols to look like mere people and birds and animals and reptiles. And we were talking about this since the very beginning. It's like the whole, like what humanity has done throughout its entire existence as far as we can archaeologically tell. And it's really, so then the next verse goes into, so God abandoned them to do whatever shameful things their hearts desired. As a result, they did vile and degrading things with each other's bodies. We talked about this. We talked about the rituals that they would have. In Rome, that was a big thing as well. And it's like, so they traded the truth about God for a lie. So they worshiped and served the things God created instead of the Creator Himself. And I think that's also like a reference to like the stars, the sun, the moon, all that, as well as like things, like animals. And anyway, so they worship. Okay, verse 26. That is why God abandoned them to their shameful desires. Even the women turned against the natural way to have sex and instead indulged in sex with each other. And the men, instead of having normal sexual relations with women, burned with lust for each other. Men did shameful things with other men, and as a result of this sin, they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. All right, I have to bring this up because I feel as if I wouldn't be doing like anything like the text justice. Okay. I am not by any means saying that he is like talking about like as a Christian you are not to condone like homosexual behavior. I have to bring this up. Because it's just like my entire life has been how many times have I heard Romans 1 brought up, right? Okay, so it's like now I'm not saying that Paul is saying that homosexual activity, like in terms of like we've had this discussion, right? I'm not saying that the homosexual activity within like God's divine order is allowed. However, we do need to take a look at the word for natural. It comes from we have a word that derives from the Greek word, which is physical. And there's actually an amazing scholarly like article on this exact word. And I just wanted to share it, and it's not refuting it. It's just like changing the concept a little bit. So where is it though? Now that's the question. There it is. Today, this amazing explanation, and it really helps like to understand like cultural perceptions and like how words just like change meaning over time. We're looking at the word eunuch before. That was totally different. Anyway, today the words natural and unnatural are often used to distinguish between something that conforms to the laws of nature and is therefore good or acceptable, and something that breaks the laws of nature and is therefore bad and unacceptable. But Fusis and Barak Fusin, I'm bad. I don't know Greek. Were not necessarily used in this manner 2,000 years ago. In antiquity, the word that's translated as natural did not refer to universal biological laws. Instead, it had a number of meanings. It could be a fundamental central rule, a conventional, proper, or inborn character or appearance, or it could be the true being of a person or thing. In Stoic philosophy, the word was used to refer to laws by which people should live. Within this context, the term probably meant something like seriously unconventional. So that's, and it's, I think that's a good way of understanding it. Again, it's not saying homosexual acts are like within the church. I'm not saying that, but I am saying that like the way that the word is more, I can definitely see the reason behind this would be better as seriously unconventional. So, like when Seneca describes hot baths, potted plants, banquets after sunset, and a sexually passive man as against nature. So when Paul spoke of this word, he was not referring, I'm saying the word because I don't know how to say it. I think it's thusis, but I'm not even going into it. He was not referring to universal laws, but what was characteristic, consistent, standard, ordinary, expected, and regular for a particular people or organism. And I think that that's a good way of looking at that. So he is basically saying it was not what they did, what women and men did was not characteristic, consistent, standard, ordinary, expected, or regular. And it's completely out of left field is basically what he's saying, right? And so I think that's a good way of looking at that. Anyway, but no, he is condemning it. Like he's saying, like this is like what God, like the sin of that, like is something that just stressed God so much, and he couldn't deal with it, right? So, okay, let's move forward. So they suffered within themselves the penalty they deserved. Since they thought it foolish to, this is 28 now. Since they thought it foolish to acknowledge God, he abandoned them to their foolish thinking and let them do things that should never be done. Their lives became full of every kind of wickedness, sin, greed, hate, envy, murder, quarreling, deception, malicious behavior, and gossip. They are backstabbers, haters of God, insolent, proud, and boastful. They invent new ways of sinning, and they disobey their parents. They refuse to understand, break their promises, are heartless, and have no mercy. They know God's justice requires that those who do these things deserve to die, yet they do them anyway. Worse yet, they encourage others to do them too. Now, if we were to just end the book there, that would sound very, very condemning. And unfortunately, it is used in a condemning way very often. It's like I hear it done all the time. I probably can't even recount how many times I've heard it in various ways on YouTube videos, in person, like coming across it like on the internet, like any stuff like it. It's Romans 1 is often used as like a thing of it's like, yes, read it in context. So at the beginning of Romans 2, it goes into it like you may think you can condemn such people, as it's often done, but you are just as bad, and you have no excuse. And I do believe that Paul is speaking to himself as well, because he did view himself as the worst of sinners. And so it's like he's talking to everyone, including himself. It's like, and you have no excuse. When you say they are wicked and should be punished, you are condemning yourself. For you who judge others do these very same things. And we know that God in his justice will punish anyone who does such things. Since you judge others for doing these things, why do you think you can avoid God's judgment when you do the same things? Don't you see, and then this is the crux, don't you see how wonderfully kind, tolerant, and patient God is with you? Does this mean nothing to you? Can't you see that his kindness is intended to turn you from your sin? But because you are stubborn and refuse to turn from your sin, you are storing up a terrible punishment for yourself. For a day of anger is coming, and when God's righteous judgment will be revealed, he will judge everyone according to what they have done. He will give eternal life to those who keep on doing good, seeking after the glory and honor and immortality that God offers. But he will pour out anger and wrath on those who live for themselves, who refuse to obey the truth and instead live lives of wickedness. There will be trouble and calamity for everyone who keeps on doing what is evil, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. But there will be glory and honor and peace from God for all who do good, for the Jew first and also for the Gentile. For God does not show favoritism. And actually later on in Romans, he basically said how great of a wonder it is that God sacrificed like his son in order for us to be grafted in. And that's just Gentiles, right? But also on top of but then it's like, and then he goes on to talk about like how the Gentiles will cause the Jews to become jealous, just as much as God was jealous for Israel. And it's like that, it's like everything is like coming into like a full circle here. And so what Paul's saying, in my opinion, is that like, hey, we are all we are all on this track, right? And it's Christ that pulls us out of this spiraling circle that we have been in since the time we were born. And because it goes into like the two Adams concept. He goes into like the whole thing about like you have like the first Adam, and then he goes into Christ as the second Adam, and he compares them. He said Adam did this one thing that caused death, but Christ did this one thing that caused life. And it's like similar to like how Moses said, like, so choose life. It's that really powerful like message there. And it's almost like you want to go back and go, preach it, Paul. It's like that whole, it's amazing. And he goes into the whole concept of the law, and he says that, I have to read this section. Okay. Chapter 2, verse 25. The Jewish ceremony of circumcision has value only if you obey God's law. But if you don't obey God's law, you're no better off than an uncircumcised Gentile. And if Gentiles obey God's law, won't God declare them to be his own people? And what he does later on in Romans is he explains, yeah, he does. He grafted them on. He took them from a wild olive tree and grafted them onto his special olive tree. And we're talking about garden imagery and all that stuff. It's just like flowing together. In fact, uncircumcised Gentiles who keep God's law will condemn you Jews who are circumcised and possess God's law but don't obey it. For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of Jewish parents or because you've gone through the ceremony of circumcision. Anyway, so there's a section here. Oh, verse 14. We're going to jump back a little bit. This one is huge. Verse 14. Even Gentiles who do not have God's written law show that they know his law when they instinctively obey it, even without having heard it. They demonstrate that God's law is written in their hearts, for their own conscience and thoughts either accuse them or tell them that they are doing right. And this is the message I proclaim, that the day is coming when God, through Christ Jesus, will judge everyone's secret life. Now, so, taking that, this is where yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, your translation didn't have it again, but in my, I'm looking at 3 different translations, and they all have natural there.
Yeah.
For the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law.
Right, by convention.
I'm just bringing that back up from earlier.
Right, it's I think it's probably the same word.
Yeah.
And he probably is repeating that word, right? And it's like by nature they fall. Yeah. And also, there's think about it this way. Think of people of other religions. You have people who have remarkably beneficial lives, like doing good to people, doing things that God would definitely approve of, right? And unfortunately, there is this very prevalent perception that I keep saying this, but this is like how I view it, is that they didn't pick the right spiritual lottery, or they were born into the wrong religion. And it's like, but if they hear the word of God from someone who basically screams it at them, and they reject it, that God will let them burn in eternal hellfire. I think that is extremely erroneous thinking, and malicious, not to mention. And what? Because of that, it says it right here. It's like there are certain things that we know are right and wrong. And God shows favor on that. Like he bestows his grace upon that. Even if it's not 100%. No one's 100%. But there's that except for Christ Jesus, but that's besides the point. We are to be, but if people emanate Christ without even knowing him in the regard of through the lens of Christianity, don't tell me that God doesn't show favor to that. And I have absolutely heard opposite. And to me, there's no love in that. Like, it's like God loved me enough to change, like, me, like, fundamentally. And it's like God loved, Paul enough that he changed so fundamentally. And it's like, and even those that don't hear the word of God, like, in that sense, it's like, come on. Like, the amount of grace that he showed murderers and all these things, it's like, and if someone lives a life not murdering someone, not, like, committing such terrible wrongs, don't tell me God doesn't show grace on that. And I think that's a very crucial point when we are looking at, like, the concept of legalism here. And Paul goes really in depth when it comes to, like, the legalist nature. And I think it's a warning to us as well. I do believe that we, in modern day Christianity, have absolutely taken on the full breadth of legalism. Definitely not to the extent that the Pharisees did. They kind of took it to another level, but the concept's there. Absolutely, it's there. And I think it's and it's like how often do, like, for example, like, we point the finger and condemn one another when it comes to that type of but then again, like, what Paul does, oh, I can't wait. Like, in, like, chapter 14, he says, like, pre-becoming a trash. I think it's 14. Yeah, chapter 14, verse 1. Accept other believers who are weak in faith and don't argue with them about what they think is right or wrong. For instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. And he's just going, it's just, verse 4, who are you to condemn someone else's servant? For their own master will judge whether they stand or fall. And with the Lord's help, they will stand and receive his approval. So that goes right in the face of, like, modern day legalism, that legalist nature. And so this is what we've been talking about all year long. Anyway, so I am taking a look here. I did take a few screenshots when I was reading Romans earlier because I noticed that I kind of lost track of my thoughts before. So let me find my screenshot. Okay. So he goes into the concept of all people being sinners. And then, like, at the end of 3, he says, like, yeah, we're all sinners, we're all terrible. Christ died for you. And then he goes, but then, do not think to yourself that, oh, but since he died for us, I mean, if we sin, it'll just show his grace even more, right? And he's like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so... I mean, a lot of the concepts that he has, like, even early on in the book, are amplified later. We're talking about parallelism. So when he's saying things like in chapter 3, verse 27, can we boast then that we have done anything to be accepted by God? No, because our acquittal is not based on obeying the law, it's based on faith. So we're made right with God through faith and not obeying the law. And then, like, in a few later chapters, he, like, takes that exact concept and, like, really expands upon it. And so just like we're talking about the concept of parallelism, and he definitely plays into that in this one. Also chiastic parallelism, is like ABBA or ABAB. And anyway, he goes into, like, Abraham, and I got one. Chapter 4, verse 20. Abraham never wavered in believing God's promise. Really? In fact, his faith grew stronger. Indeed, it did. I think that's where Paul's getting at here. It didn't waver, it's just he tried to get his promise through his own means. But anyway, and he was fully convinced that God's able to do whatever he promises. And then God counted him as righteous, right? And then, like, and that whole thing with Isaac, him leading him up, like, was just like that final crossroads demonstration of faith. Anyway, and then chapter 5 is about, like, the joy we get that. Wait a second. Paul starts the letter saying that he's a slave, but yet he talks about the freedom we get. We'll get to that. So, Adam and Christ being contrasted, yeah. Chapter 6, verse 19. Because of the weakness of your human nature. And so anyway, I am using, actually here it says flesh, if I remember correctly. I did look it up. That one, like today I was like, wait a second, which one is this? Like, is this actually that word again? It's actually flesh. I am using the illustration of slavery to help you understand all of this. Previously, I mean, he's like saying it right here. If we need evidence of how he's toying with an idea, I mean, he's saying it. Previously, you let yourselves be slaves to impurity and lawlessness, which led, because I'm talking about being a slave to sin, which led ever deeper into sin. Now, you must give yourselves to be slaves to righteous living, so that you will become holy. It's for this reason that he calls himself a slave of Jesus Christ. And slavery had that context of, yeah, you're being bound and controlled in that sense. Paul has a different way of going into that one. So, verse 20. When you were slaves to sin, you were free from the obligation to do right. So he's toying with the idea. It's like you were slaves, but you were free. But what? To not do what was right. And what was the result? You are now ashamed of the things you used to do, things that end in eternal doom. But now you are free from the power of sin and have become slaves of God. Now you do those things that lead to holiness and result in eternal life. For the wages of sin is death, but the free gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. The free gift of God. So don't tell me he isn't playing with words here. And so we're talking about, oh, but now you're no longer bound to the law. You are bound to Christ. He goes into a whole spiel about talking about how when we were bound to law, it revealed how sinful we were. And then when Christ died for us, that law's power over us was lost. And he goes, oh, where is your sting? It's gone. Like that. It's So anyway. But he also talks about, in 7 as well, how he does things he doesn't want to do. It's like he wants to do some things, but he still doesn't. And you can see that Paul is actually stating his weaknesses here. And it's the same thing. That's why I go back to, like, with Christ. Christ did show some weakness. He, like in the Garden of Gethsemane, for example. But like when he got exhausted after like healing the sick. But Paul here is basically saying, like, there are some things I still do that I just don't want to do. And that I yearn not to, but I still do them anyway. So Paul is definitely showing himself in that weak spot again, like worse than where Christ was. So it's like, but yet, like, he was who he was, and it's like, and that's why I love that he goes, I'm not a slave to sin anymore, but yet my flesh is, he's like, there's who you are as a person is not bound to sin anymore, but my flesh still has simple things because my flesh itself is dying. And then he says, I wish so heavily that going back to Philippians, when he's talking about having like that body, because then that simple flesh will no longer be a part of who we are, and we will be made new. like entirely. And it's like we're a work in progress is basically what Paul's saying here. But we still have that promise, that free gift of Jesus. And then like talking about praying and like the whole concept, that whole verse of like sometimes you just groan, but it's the Spirit groaning within you, like, or how you say things that like that God knows what you should pray, so you just let your mouth speak it, and it's like that whole love it. So Romans 8, verse 12. I believe this is the Romans Road verse, if I am correct. The Roman Road. Maybe it's a little bit later. But let's start with verse 12. Therefore, dear brothers and sisters, you have no obligation to do what your sinful nature urges you to do. For if you live by its dictates, you will die. But it's like you have another tree moment here. It's like on the day you eat of it. Anyway. But if through the power of the Spirit you put to death the deeds of your sinful nature, you will live. For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. So you have, and that phrase, that particular phrase, is sons of God. The first time we see the term sons of God is in Genesis, when it has to do with like the stars and the nations and all that stuff, and the sons of God were with the daughters of men, and so so bear with me. We're getting I can't even. Okay, so verse 15. So you have not received the spirit that makes you fearful slaves. But wait a second. Aren't we to fear God? Aren't we to? But yeah, then love casts out all fear. Okay, we'll come back to that. Aren't we slaves to God? I mean, Paul himself wrote himself as a bondservant, a slave. Okay, so now he's saying, you have not received the spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Take long walks in the park with that one, and nice hot cups of tea. Instead, you received God's Spirit when He adopted you as His own children. We have talked ad nauseum about the whole. God doesn't want slaves in the sense that other gods dictated. He doesn't want that. He wants that love relationship. He wants to look at his children, and more than that. Just hold on with that one. But he's like, as his children, and he says, as children or sons of God. In the council chamber were the sons of God. There are references to this throughout the Old Testament. And it's like, okay, and Paul was a Pharisee. And the Pharisees had that oral tradition that only amplified this idea. If Paul spent a large portion of his training learning stuff like this, don't tell me that he's not playing with the idea here. And so this is, anyway. So now we call him Abba, for his spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. That doesn't sound like slave imagery anymore, does it? So do you see what's happening here? He's like stepping it from slave to child to heir, because not all children were heirs. And it's like, so it's like heirs were like the firstborn. But wait, Christ was the firstborn here in this type of idea. But then through marriage with him, and the two shall become one. That concept is solidifying here. And so anyway, and since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, I felt like, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. Some pretty equal playing field there. I'm not saying that God doesn't have divine role. It's a paradox. Because just like what Isaiah was saying, it's like, we know that he is God. Like, who else compares to him? But you. You're his likeness. And it sounds, even to me, even today, still, I cringe just a tiny little bit in the back of my head because it feels so wrong at times to say this. But this is what Paul is saying, and not just Paul either. Like, why do you think Christ said, I'm going back to my Father's house because he's making a place for us? That's wedding imagery. And it's like, and the two shall become one. It's mind-boggling. And yet Paul laments how many times by saying, I wish that that would come now, but I know there's more race to be run. So this is like the whole thing coming together. And then after that sentence, right before 18, it says, but if we are to share his glory, share, doesn't sound like it's like, oh, if he's going to just give us just like a pat on the head. Like, if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering. This is why it's pick up your cross and follow me. This is why it's all about, like, it's everything is coming together. So I think I've said that like 15,000 times in this session or more.
Or more.
Maybe 15,003. You never know. So, and he's talking about, like, but the suffering is only momentary. And he goes into, like, that whole thing. Anyway, I'm jumping again. But I think this is why I leave it to everyone watching or participating to just read. Like, just read Romans with that light, right? Like, that concept. It's amazing. It's extremely encouraging. And it is lamentable that it's also used to condemn people, and Paul himself says, don't. Like, this is weird to me, like, in this way. That does not mean that there is times for certain things to happen if certain things should arise. But what he's saying is, it's like, going back to, like, that unity concept, like, let's join together, let's share in this together. Let's amazing. So, verse 26, and the Holy Spirit helps us in our weaknesses. And this is like the whole section where it says, like, if we don't know what to pray for, like, it goes, but there's something in us that does. And the Spirit will step in and take over that flesh so that when you pray, like, it will, like God himself, like, allows that to come forth. It is, Verse 29. For God knew his people in advance, and he chose them to become like his Son, so that his Son would be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. And having chosen them, he called them to come to him. So it's like the firstborn of many, and it's like he was in distance, and he's saying, no, come. So, and having called them, he gave them right standing with himself. That means equal playing field right there. Like, it's like not just like, oh, like, I am the firstborn and good job to you, good job to you, good job to you. No, he's basically saying, come to me. This is ours together. So And having called them, he gave them right standing with himself. And having given them right standing, he gave them his glory. So it's not top-down perspective at that point anymore. We share. And love it. And then he goes on to the whole thing that I am certain that neither life or death, Jew, Gentile, Greek, he goes into the whole thing, the heavens above or the earth below or Hades or anything like that can ever separate us from the love that God has for us. And then he talks about like the whole thing about Israel. I think it's interesting in verse 3 of chapter 9 when he says, after the end of the sentence, he says, I would be willing to be forever cursed, cut off. That we were talking about cut off, like cutting off the people. It's tree imagery, cutting off branches. Cut off from Christ, if that could save them. That's exactly what Christ did for us. That's exactly what Paul said. If necessary, I would do it. That's what Christ himself said, pick up your cross and follow me. It's like, if it could even make a slightest difference, like, get the image here. If it could make the slightest difference, like if my sacrifice or Paul's sacrifice or mom's sacrifice, or like any of our sacrifices could get more people, then so be it. So, with that being said, it's also stated that Christ's sacrifice was enough. Don't tell me he isn't pursuing everyone as much as he possibly can. But again, it is their choice in the end. But it's like, so, yeah. And he's talking about them, and what Paul is saying them is like his people, the Israelites. But still, it's the same idea. It's like, I think that similar light. Moses did that on Mount Sinai. He said, let me be forever blotted from your book. So it's, anyway. And then God said, no, I'll just work with them. So, and he did. And he did work with them all the way through until Christ died on the cross, and he's still working with us today. That is like what Paul was talking about. I am certain, just before that, he had just said, nothing can separate us from God's love. Anyway. Okay, just taking a look. In verse 19, well then, you might say, why does God blame people for not responding? Haven't they simply done what he makes them do? No, don't say that. Who are you, a mere human being, to argue with God? Should the thing that was created say to the one who created it, why have you made me like this? Personal anecdote. I totally have done this before. I just have. I literally have. I actually was in a prayer before, and I literally threw that verse in his face. And I said, well, here I am, the clay talking to the potter and saying, why? Why? And I was very snarky in my prayer with him. But this isn't, no, I have a very unpopular opinion on this one. But I think that there are times when, like, you have a very loving husband and wife, that there are times when you get snarky with one another. And whenever I have in the past, it's been a while since I have, but about a year. It's been about a year. Yeah, just exactly a year. That I had a prayer where I basically pointed the finger in God's face. It's just think husband and wife. And like you have like one or the other just like that. It's like you're still participating. And as long as you have the open ear to work things out, to reason things together, I don't think God shies away from that. I think God can take it. I'm not saying to go out and point the finger in his face, but there are times when there is such great emotion and love there that there are times David did it, and it's so it's interesting to have that dynamic. Think about it. What do you think God wants more? Does God want someone who just bows down to him and just mindlessly utters, I love you, I love you, I love you, like a slave? or someone who actively participates in his love, and sometimes calls him out on it. Just like Moses did. He reminded God of his promises. And to call him out, goes, but we have to be willing, though. This is the biggest point to it. To not walk away afterward. That after our pieces are spoken, like Job, that we actively listen and hear what response comes. I will admit, after I pointed the finger in God's face before, I've totally gotten a smackdown a couple of times. But that's okay. Not really a smackdown, more like, okay, well, you presented your case and here's mine. That type of thing. And the way God really works with me is, it just happens to be, was it today? Where a certain, oh yeah, it was yesterday. I was praying about something, and it was Jeremiah, some random verse from Jeremiah, just pops into my head, and it's just, that's how it works, right? That's how my relationship is, right? Everyone's relationship is different. I do believe that there's that unique thing. There's a reason why Paul talks about the uniqueness of things. Everyone has their own way, and it's but when I pray and I speak my case, and then I stop and I'm like, okay, your turn. It's that type of thing. It's I get this flood of verses that often happens. Or when I'm questioning something, just a weird random verse that I haven't thought of ages just pops into my head, or a section of scripture, and it's okay. It's I'm still angry, but I'm working on it. That type of relationship, because God gets angry, but he was working on it. And so I think that we struggle with him, and that is what it means to groan in the Spirit as well. Sometimes we don't even know. Sometimes we have to shout, but in pains of labor. So this is so. What do you think God wants more? Someone who has that struggle with him, or someone who just bows back and forth and mindlessly utters phrases? And so sadly, they don't realize they're doing it. And I think that's the saddest thing as well. To for example, just blindlessly uttering "I love you, I love you, I love you, I love you," without actually participating in it. And the weirdest thing to me too is I was there just a few years ago. I was completely there. I was with God, but I had someone explained it as being arm distance, or thinking that I can't attain that level. And then it's through this submission process of oh, we're gonna get to that Romans 12. It's through this submission process, it's then it's that cultivation of love just burst. I couldn't control it. I fell in love with God. And it's and it is a process. You don't just fall in love like that. Some do. But that's a rare occurrence, isn't it? Even when you think of husbands and wives, that love at first sight thing kind of it's not that common. And it does happen with God, but not that commonly with people when people turn to God. So I think this is just an example of how much of a loving relationship. Anyway, so I think this is verse. Of course, it didn't come. I have the verse, but not the chapter. Wait, let me find the chapter before I get there. Okay. So, got it. Perfect. Talking about God's mercy on Israel. Chapter 11, verse 17. But some of the branches of Abraham's tree, some of the people of Israel, have been broken off, not cut off, broken off. How does a branch get broken off? How does a branch get
Yeah, I know,
broken?
but where are you going with that?
It withers. It dies.
It could.
It doesn't have that life source. And so they've been broken off. And you Gentiles, who are branches from a wild olive tree, have been grafted in. A wild olive tree, like in the wilderness. So now you also receive the blessing God has promised Abraham and his children, sharing the rich nourishment. So yeah, this particular breaking off has to do with the lack of nourishment. And the rich nourishment from the root of God's special olive tree. But you must not brag about being grafted in to replace the branches that were broken off. You're just the branch, not the root. Well, you may say those branches were broken off to make room for me. Those would have worked there. But anyway, yes, but remember those branches were broken off because they didn't believe in Christ. And you were there because you do. So don't think highly of yourself but fear what could happen. I love that section too where where Paul says, don't think so highly of yourself, you're not that important. I love that. But the paradox is, but you are. It's just we can't recognize ourselves in a human way of being as important, but to God, you are worth dying for. And it's paradoxical. Anyway, so notice how God's both kind and severe. Anyway, so I'm talking about the wild olive tree for your own pleasurable reading. And he says yeah, not all Israel will be saved, but then he says later, but all Israel will be saved. And again, paradox. There's a little bit of extra reading there, but it's really, that amount of love. It's this is the God I fell in love with. This is the God that I would give anything for. And why would I want to get rid of what I'm saying is why would I dedicate my life to something I would be a true and genuine slave to? It's why? It's so bland, and just the concept of God saying, this is the way, walk in it, because it leads to us being together. That to me is the best pickup line that I've ever heard. So anyway, so all right, now, okay, let's start. Okay. This is my #1 favorite section of Romans 12. It's so funny too because it was mentioned not too long ago and something I was yeah. Okay, so let's read the beginning of 12 first, and then we'll go to the end of 11. Because years ago, when I was being completely transformed, the process was really shifting at this point. I was still struggling with sin for the first few years after my baptism, and then God gave me a Mack truck, and he's been working ever since. And it's just and it's kind of it's been this, and then in the last 3 years alone, it's been it's that's basically how my faith has gone. And but I do remember one of the pivotal moments very shortly after God hit me with Mack truck, probably a few months later. So we're talking about summer of 2017, that I was that my eyes were brought to this verse. So verse 12:1. And so, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all He's done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind He'll find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Don't copy the behavior and customs of this world, but let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Then you will learn to know God's will for you, which is good and pleasing and perfect. I knew of the concept of sacrifices and offerings by this point, so I knew what was being said there. And it was when I was reading that, I'm so we're to be a living sacrifice, and I was really looking at this I was really, my dynamics were changing at this point. My thinking processes were changing. And that just really, really turned to me, yeah, become that that actual sacrifice and talking about how he sacrificed himself for me, I sacrificed myself for him, that was forming around that time, right? Little twist. So let's now go back recently to, we've got this little twist. So go back to verse 33 of chapter 11. Oh, how great are God's riches in wisdom and knowledge. How impossible it is for us to understand his decisions and his ways. Didn't Paul just say, I am praying for your further understanding? He just said that to the Philippians. So he does know that we get understanding. So anyway, so for who can know the Lord's thoughts? Who knows enough to give him advice? I feel as if we read that sometime today. So anyway, and this probably didn't though. And who? Oh no, it is the same one. Yep, no, yeah. It's there, and it's also referenced in Job. And we're talking about how it's very similar to when God makes His presence known in Job. And who has given him so much that he needs to pay it back? For everything comes from him, and exists by his power, and is intended for his glory. All glory to him forever. Amen. So we're talking about who knows enough to give him advice. That's counseling. And so we're talking about the council chamber. And how do you become, like, who knows enough to give him advice? But remember, Isaiah 40 was basically saying who was like God. Who was doing, like, and it's like, and it ends it by saying, if you trust him, you are. Same thing here. Don't tell me that Paul didn't just pull a single verse, and like a single verse I'm talking about, right? Like how often do we just have single verses taken out of context? I believe that Paul meant it to be referenced in terms of like, oh, let's go back to Isaiah 40 and read the whole thing in context, and which we did. And so when we're looking at this, it's like, so yeah, all those who trust in him are like him, can counsel him. And it's that, even that still feels like a little bit weird to me, but I know it's right. Like I just know it's right, but that fleshy part of me, that disbelief is still just right there. It's much farther back than it used to be. But it's because I can see it working in other people's lives. So but it's that fleshy nature that's like, but really though? But really? Like, so anyway. And so then, leading into that, talking about us being living sacrifices. So we're sacrifices, we're slaves. And this, being a sacrifice and a slave, turns us into his children, being grafted in, and like where Christ is like the stem, and like, but he's also the head, and he is also the one who says, come to me, and we will share in this together. I will give you my glory. And it's like it like he takes off his own crown, and it's like it shatters and it goes onto everyone's head, including his own. And it's wait. I wonder if there's crown references in another book. We'll get to that. So anyway, so that is right there, the whole concept. And anyway, so because of the I love that. Don't, this is right below, in verse 3 it says, don't think you're better than you really are. Be honest in your evaluation of yourself, measuring yourselves by the faith God has given us. Just as our bodies have many parts and each part has a special function, so it is with Christ's body. We are many parts of one body. Think about that. So it's like, okay, so it's like this part doesn't have more importance than this part, but it has a special purpose. And that's the same thing. So if we're all part of the same body, that means we're all one, that unity concept. So it goes back to like, okay, so Christ takes off his own crown, shatters it to the point where it's on everyone's head. Everyone has a different responsibility, but the glory is shared. And it's like, but don't think that because of that, that we have a right to be haughty toward others. Instead, how we boast is in the marvelous grace that Christ has shown us in order for us to be able to love others as ourselves. That it's so paradoxical, but it's so filled with compassion. Anyway, so that's And I think, like, the rest of it really does, like, it just really just amplifies this over and over. And, talking about paying your taxes, respecting authority, like governmental figures. If you receive oppression, put your hands up, and then just like, okay, like we suffer for him, we suffer together, and it's like, yep, and it really does just amplify it. Like the whole rest of it is like I love this section in chapter 14, verse 20. Don't tear apart the work of God over what you eat. Remember, all foods are acceptable. And I believe it goes beyond food. All foods are acceptable, but what is wrong to eat something if it makes another person stumble? So it is better not to eat meat or drink wine or to do anything else if it might cause another believer to stumble. You may believe there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, but keep it between yourself and God. Blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they've decided is right. So this is like, you're not bound by the law. And there are certain things that you can do because you are made free as a slave of Christ. But if it makes another person stumble, then don't use that as something to make another person. It's like so paradoxical. And then talking about like living like in a sense that like will bring everyone together. So, like chapter 15, verse 7. Therefore, accept each other, just as Christ has accepted you, so that God will be given glory. Remember that Christ came as a servant to the Jews to show that God is true to the promises he made to their ancestors. He also came so that the Gentiles might give glory to God for his mercies to them. And then he's like, oh, yeah, at the very end of 15, he's like, oh, yeah, maybe I can like make it over and like see you guys and stuff like that. No one really knows what happened. He could have been released. He could have been killed. No one knows. So it's more than likely that he definitely died by the time Revelation was written, but like no one knows exactly how that happened. And then he had like this whole really long section compared to the other epistles we read about like say hi to this person, they send their greetings, all this stuff is there. And then at the very end, got 16 verse 17. And now I make one more appeal, my dear brothers and sisters. Watch out for people who cause divisions and upset people's faith by teaching things contrary to what you've been taught. Stay away from them. Such people are not serving Christ. But wait a second. Like this whole thing is like accepting others, like being in that unity. But there are times where you flee from certain ideas and certain things and things that like entrap you back into that concept of. I do believe what he's getting at here is making some sort of legalism that doesn't belong. I do believe that he's coming from that perspective. That's what a lot of this book is about. So such people are not serving Christ our Lord. They're serving their own personal interests. By smooth talk and glowing words, they deceive innocent people. And I got to admit, even when I'm saying these things right now, I'm thinking to myself, because that little part of my head thinks, really though? And it's like I'm questioning myself as I read this. But there's a stronger presence there saying, no, you see it everywhere in Scripture. It's not just in one place, and you're not making it say something. It's like you can see it. We just spent 2 hours doing that. So, anyway, but everyone knows that you are obedient to the Lord. This makes me very happy. I want you to be wise in doing right and to stay innocent of any wrong. The God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. But didn't he already? It's an interesting thought. May the grace of our Lord Jesus be with you. And then it's talking about like saying hi, bye. This person says hi. You guys say well. Verse 25. Now all glory to God, who is able to make you strong, just as my good news says. I love how he says my good news. This message about Jesus Christ has revealed his plan for you Gentiles. A plan kept secret from the beginning of time, mysterious. But now as the prophets foretold, and another thing about secrets, secretary type thing is like it has like a courtship connotation to it. Like that in the royal court it was kept away until the proper time for it to be unsealed. Because the things were sealed and open. So anyway.
But now as the prophets foretold, and as the eternal God has commanded, this message is made known to all Gentiles everywhere, so that they too might believe and obey him. All glory to the only wise God, through Jesus Christ forever. Amen. I love it. I love it. So, anyway, that was Roman in an hour. Talks amongst yourselves. Like, read it by yourselves. I have totally, and it's funny because how God just completely changes the dynamic. Like, having grown up as a legalist, having, like, come across God's own grace in my own life. Like turning to him, falling in love with him, and now seeing him in every page. Like, genuinely seeing him in every page. Like, that is, yeah, he's worth being a living sacrifice for. But in that sacrifice, I find freedom. And in that freedom, I find this love that I've never known. So, like, it's so paradoxical, but it's so God at the same time. And those are my thoughts. Does anyone have stuff they wanted to talk about before we started?
Legalism.
Yeah, go for it. I got to blow my nose.
And the legalism of the old church. So it was.
Oh, you got to explain if anyone's viewing this, because sometimes we get like 5 viewers and sometimes we get like 1. So, what do you mean by the legalist nature of our church?
That keeping the dietary laws and the Sabbath and the holy days, tithing. I said clean and unclean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that kind of thing. It wasn't that God wasn't personal. He was personal on every page, but he was more at arm length because you had to do this, you had to do this, you had to do this. It was more of an arm length thing. But he was there and powerful, spiritually powerful. But the law kept them more at arm's length.
Not to mention, too, in that particular church, there was that policing that was done.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and there would be gossip among people, such as like the spring cleaning before the Passover.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, about like how this person might not have done a thorough enough job, or this person would, like, that type of like, and Paul says, if you look at Romans 1 talking about the gossiping, all that stuff.
Yeah, another thing too with the holy days, usually by the time the holy day rolled around, the women were so tired. And you still had your kids to take care of or whatever. It was very exhausting.
Mm. If anyone wants to know what is being referenced, the spring cleaning, which I have experienced as an adult a couple of times, and I remember portions of it when I was a child. And from when I experienced it as an adult, it's like, okay, think of like the amount of preparation that people put in Thanksgiving or for Christmas, and like amplify that, especially the women, amplify that by like 10. Like that is definitely the type of craziness that was done.
Cleaning for Passover started like January.
Yep.
Yeah, the end of January. Yeah.
I'm sure there's some in the congregation.
There's 2 or 3 months long.
And it's like, and that was done through passion, right? Like they wanted to do these things. But the thing is, though, it's like, but there was also that gossip that happened, and then also like that, and then there was also that misogyny within the church as well. That was like the husbands expected the wives to do these things, and not all of them, but that type of mentality did exist within that church. It was not a majority, but it was definitely a notable minority. So,
well, it wasn't any different than any other, like as far as the conflict in the churches. It wasn't any different than any other church, basically.
The misogyny was stronger, I think.
Yeah, it was just different. And what I mean is it had a different angle. There's always conflict because people are people. You get your conflicts, but it was a different angle.
And it was also that thing, too. It was just like they would profess things like, oh, yeah, following the law doesn't make us necessarily right with God. But yet they would criticize one another if they didn't follow it exactly the right way.
Oh,
it's
like, in the cleaning part, I remember being told that it showed your attitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If you just cleaned lightly, you didn't have a strong enough attitude of.
Right. That's why I was
service.
saying that people were very passionate about doing
Yeah,
it.
you had to.
But it was still that like you wouldn't be right in God's eyes if you didn't do it enough. Yeah.
And the symbolism was, and this whole thing, the symbolism was, it was impossible to get sin out of your life because there was no way you could possibly get all the leaven out of the house.
Crumb. So to explain it, the spring cleaning had to do with the Jewish tradition is for Passover to get rid of all the leaven in your house, right? All the crumbs, all that stuff. Now the church that we're talking about took it to like the extreme, like to like tearing up floors, like going into the nooks and crannies, like pulling all the furniture out, sweeping every nook and cranny. It's intense.
And don't forget your toaster.
Oh yeah.
I knew a guy with a friend.
He threw it out. Yeah.
No, he did.
He threw it out.
Threw it out, but not only that, I knew one guy put it in the shower.
Yeah, right.
And remember?
I didn't we get to the point we just bought cheap toasters so that we would just throw it out the window?
That's what we did. That's what we did. We'd get the cheap toasters and use them for a year and pitch them out.
Throw them out.
Mm-hmm.
It was easier than cleaning them.
Well, they're horrible. Yeah.
They're virtually impossible.
I mean, so it goes right back to it, though. It's just like, and then yet the blindness of that church was that they knew the scripture, but they couldn't see. And it's like seeing, they do not see, and hearing, they do not hear. And it's very similar to that. And then looking at fundamentalism as another example, it just is a different dynamic, but it's very, very similar in its like concept. It's like how like women are the extreme version, like women aren't allowed to wear pants, for example, or it's like that.
Even in the WWCG, we were allowed to wear slacks.
Yeah, you were. Yeah. No. What I was saying was.
And the fundamentalists.
Right. It's a different type of legalism, but it's still legalism. That's what I was getting at. Because it's like, I remember, and it's funny, because you had people in that church saying about the fundamentalists about, like, how, oh, do you believe that they won't allow women to wear pants? But yet here we have, like, the women are expected to be cleaning out the houses every single year before Passover. And it's like, make it make sense. But anything else on Romans and like just concept of like God's relationship with us before we close it up for tonight?
I think you went over too much detail in Romans. Verse by verse is getting a little bit long.
So,
maybe you could have done it Romans in 2 sessions. I don't know.
I agree, but I think the biggest point is Revelation. Like that book.
Yeah. No, but I was just kidding. I think this is more of a.
I know.
Not the detail.
I was showing Linda a preview with Revelation chapter 1. So it was it's like just little sections, and then it's like, what do you think the rest of the book is like in comparison? As far as the 7 lampstands. Go ahead.
Oh yeah. What are you going to do? Go one chapter at a time in Revelation? That's what you almost have to do.
You can't. Don't ask.
Oh no, he's not. No, he's not.
Oh.
Like I'm just. I was just.
I mean, there's so much symbolism and back to Old Testament and all over the place. Yeah.
Why was he standing in the middle of 7 lampstands with 7 candlesticks?
What about it? Everybody has menorahs, right?
Like 7 times 7 is 49, and then he was in the middle.
Middle of 50. Was that the Jubilee? Yeah. And he's dressed like a priest, and he's dressed like the high priest, right?
And there's fire coming out of his eyes, as well as a sword, and this is what I told Linda, and his voice sounds like the ocean, and Oh, so I'll just say this. The sea was seen as death, like certain death, and also darkness. And a sword, we talked about the implication of the sword, but it wasn't in his hand, it was in his mouth. So his voice and his lips, or coming from his mouth, were things that could pierce and kill. And so it's like raging waters that go over you. But these raging waters we are baptized in. It's,
Yeah. And what is this? What's sharper than a two-edged? What is sharper than a two-edged sword?
I know this joke.
The word.
It's not a joke.
Oh yeah,
it's the word of God.
So
is that symbolism really a sword, or is it the word of God coming out of his mouth like a two-edged sword?
That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. The word
because
of God
you look at
is
all
like
these symbols.
You. Yeah.
Exactly.
That's exactly the point. Yeah, that's it.
There's so much. There's so much to it. It's just
amazing.
Oh
yeah. Oh, this is all chapter 1. But like, I don't know what I'm gonna do for the whole rest of the book. So anyway, but this is definitely a totally different light of looking at things. A totally different light.
We still got a few more books to go through, don't we? We
do. We have the remaining 6 supposedly called epistles for debate on that one, but I think it's going to be interesting to take a look at them. I do believe that is still very much God inspired. And then you also have Hebrews, and then we have like Peter, and you have James, you have Jude, and John, and so anyway, so. We'll see how that goes. Maybe we'll do it similarly, but I don't want to like downplay what we'll just see how it goes. I'm just putting it up in God's hands. We'll just go from there. So, all right. Anything else before we close?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Humon? Okay. Well, I guess we're just going to give it to the big guy. Father, thank you for your love. Thank you for who you are, for proposing to us, for giving us those wonderful pickup lines, because you truly pick us up from the ground. You truly, even though we are worthless, you give us worth. Even though we are lifeless, you give us life, and life that will never fade away. Your passion for us, your unfailing love for us is so much that we can't even begin to truly comprehend it. But as we grow with you, we begin to understand it. The paradoxes are out of this world. We throw ourselves to you. You've cleansed us. You've made us new. You continue to shape us like a potter with clay. And as we submit to you, you give us the greatest freedom we've ever known. Thank you for who you are. In Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.